All right, folks, we've gotten the defining story to set the narrative of the latest Israel-Gaza war. It is the so-called beheaded babies of southern Israel, the infants who were discovered headless by the Israeli military. The source for this claim is a tweet from a reporter who said that they talked to someone in the IDF who said that he came across a cache of beheaded babies. And I think the original tweet even said, they were babies that had been killed, some of which had been beheaded. So perhaps not all beheaded. Anyway, I'm not saying this is untrue. I don't think that this is like beyond the pale for the Hamas guys. They're some of the most brutal people on the planet. But we have heard very similar stories in Middle East wars, haven't we? One of which was used directly as the big cudgel to get the U.S. involved in a certain Middle East war. We were told that Saddam Hussein's soldiers were ripping babies out of incubators and that they were being thrown out third-story windows to go splat in the parking lot. This wild claim was made by a totally unbiased, local civilian girl from the area who lived near this hospital in Kuwait. And she was just so horrified by the sight that she saw that she had to journey all the way to Washington, D.C. and testify before the U.S. Congress. And, of course, her testimony was used by all those pushing to go to war in Kuwait against Iraq, to push Saddam Hussein out and to reclaim Kuwait for the monarchy. All hail the Emir of Kuwait. Well, it turns out that this random civilian off the street who claims to have seen Iraqi soldiers ripping babies out of incubators and throwing them from the third-story window to go splat on the parking lot, she was actually the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. So, was she even in Kuwait at the time of the invasion? I would think probably not if her dad was an ambassador. She was probably in Washington, D.C. when this happened. And so the whole thing was a lie. People understand that now. But it was like the big emotional cudgel used to badger people into supporting a war against Iraq. And once we had gone to war with Iraq once and let Saddam Hussein live, well, then it was much easier later on because people were already conditioned to believe, Saddam Hussein, he's that big villain that we've let fester in the Middle East for the last, at that point, 12 years. And so by 2003, it's like, you know what? Yeah, he probably did do 9/11 too, since we all know that he ripped those babies out of incubators. He probably sent Saddam Hussein, sent Osama bin Laden's men to New York to blow up those buildings. That was probably Saddam Hussein. That's what people thought in 2003. And in large part, it all goes back to the babies in the incubators. And so when you hear a similar story, and in fact a much more awful story, because they didn't say that Saddam's men beheaded any babies. What they actually said, they didn't even say that they threw them out the window so that they could go splat on the parking lot. What she said was that the Iraqi soldiers were removing babies from incubators, who needed to be in incubators because they were premature births or something, and then they were just letting them die on the counter. Which, again, is such an oddly specific act of cruelty, but again, not as bad as beheading a baby. And that, at least, even though it was a false witness, it was perjury, there was a witness who gave testimony under penalty of perjury before the U.S. Congress. This other claim is a tweet from a journo who claims she spoke to a soldier who actually saw this. And so it does seem odd to me that the big story, the big emotional cudgel used to try and badger people into supporting going to war on Israel's behalf is something that's not directly verifiable, because there are so many really bad videos that have come out that the media could be showing more of if they wanted to, that appear to be genuine acts by Hamas of crimes against their fellow man. Atrocities committed against civilians, executing unarmed people. Hamas is releasing official statements saying that they're going to start wasting hostages if Israel doesn't stop bombing civilian targets in Gaza. And because Gaza is it's a very densely populated city. There's like 2 million people living in something like 140 square miles. It's very, very tiny. That's smaller than the city limits of Tampa, Florida, and I don't think 2 million people live within the city limits of Tampa, Florida. But imagine a dense area like that, and there's bombs falling out of the sky. There's no way that you hit a military target without hitting also a civilian target. These are all multi-story buildings with many different tenants. And so Israel at this point seems to be essentially writing off the hostages, understanding, hey, we're not going to, and you have to have some respect for the strategic recognition here. They're not messing around. They're like, hey, sure, they got 100 of our guys. We're just going to basically pretend that they're already dead, because they're going to ask for way too much in order to get them back. And so Israel is saying, hey, if we knew where these hostages were, we wouldn't bomb them. That's kind of the most they're willing to say. But they're saying, until then, until we know where they are, we're just going to bomb wherever we think we're going to need to bomb. And of course, Hamas has already said, every time you bomb somewhere, we're going to waste one hostage, which, considering that there's probably more than one civilian that gets killed in every single Israeli bombing of in these densely populated areas. On average, I would think more than one person dies. It's not an exact 1-for-1. But since Hamas only has 100 hostages total, I don't think that they want to just waste them all. After all, they call it wasting hostages for a reason. Once you kill a hostage, you can't use them as leverage against your opponent anymore. And as I said yesterday, Israel has already cut off Gaza from the rest of the world. You're going to see dysentery and cholera probably spread in due time if fresh water is not restored. People are going to start dying if electricity is not restored. Fuel is completely cut off, so generators are not an option. Hamas is going to have a very difficult situation on their hands if this doesn't end quickly for them. They want this to end quickly. The Israelis, on the other hand, at this point, since they claim to have retaken the territory that was seized initially by Hamas, it's probably in their best interest to drag this out, because that's how they can cause the most pain. If they recognize, if they sort of give up on the 100 or so hostages, we don't have an exact number, and just let them die, Israel can, keep going about its business here, exacting retribution. And I don't think that any side here is really moral. Obviously, in this particular case, Hamas started the fight, but they have plenty of reason to hate Israel and want to fight them anyway. Israel has done a lot of bad things over the years, let's just say. There's a lot of baggage here, and I'm not going to go into the entire history of the Arab-Israeli conflict over the next few minutes. I've gone over it before, and there's a lot of people who go over it more eloquently than I can. You probably, if you want to check out Scott Horton's podcast, he's covered it ad nauseum. I think that's probably where you'll find the best the best breakdowns of like the history. So there is no good side here, but there are innocent people. The vast majority of people on both sides, completely innocent, have no control over this, and they're the ones who are going to suffer the most, as always. If you're born in Gaza, you can't just vote out Hamas. You're stuck with them. Hamas has been around since like 2005. Israel put them in charge, and they've not allowed anyone else to take power in Gaza. Presumably, Israel is just happy with having Hamas to deal with. They would rather deal with Hamas than someone who's a little more reasonable. Maybe that would just make the people in Gaza look too sympathetic. Having absolute savages like Hamas in charge probably helps Israel on the international scene, because they can just point to Hamas and say, look, we can't deal with these Palestinians. They're nuts. They are human animals, as the defense minister said yesterday. And like Anakin in Attack of the Clones, the Israeli defense minister is committed to slaughtering them like animals. And not just the men, but the women and the children too. Because Gaza has a very, very low average age, probably because they have a high death rate. Or I should say low life expectancy. About 1 million of Gaza's 2 million residents are children. It's a place where people die young, and memories don't go back, very far. At least not in lived experience. Sure, they've heard the stories. There are people who still walk around with necklaces with their old house keys of when they used to live outside of Gaza before they were ethnically cleansed from their villages. And most of those people are dead now, and it's their children and grandchildren who wear those necklaces. And then you look at examples like what's happened this week to the Israeli side, and you understand why so much hatred exists in their hearts. There is truly nothing to love between these two sides, and there is no way that either of them could back down. And that's why this cycle will continue until one of them is wiped out for good. And, I'm not saying that it would be the honorable thing if you lived in Gaza to just, if you were in charge of Gaza, the dictator of Gaza, just standing down and, completely acquiescing to whatever Israel wants. That would not end well for you, because they would slowly kill you and wipe you out, because you know that that's their goal. And at the same time, if you're Israel, you know that the goal of the people in Gaza is to get out of Gaza, to break out, and to reclaim the villages of theirs that were razed decades and decades ago, and to expand and recolonize, their former homeland. And so there will be no coexistence between the two sides. Even if you gave these people formal Israeli citizenship, as I stated before, Israel could never go for that, because then the Jews would be a minority in the so-called Jewish state. And so the Israelis can't allow the Palestinians to have equal rights as citizens. And at the same time, the Palestinians can't tolerate their current position. And that's why extermination or ethnic cleansing, if you want to be nice about it, if you don't, if you want to give people the option to escape, that is the end game for one side or the other. As I said, though, before, it is the people in Gaza who are the most at risk. If it really came to that, they would be the ones who would be wiped out. As I do still believe, even though they were caught off guard, and this has probably been quite an embarrassing week for the IDF that Hamas was able to do this much damage, it still is pretty minuscule by comparison to what the IDF can and will do to the Palestinians in Gaza. So we'll see how much destruction the Israelis are going to be able to get away with now that they've been essentially handed as a political capital by this sneak attack massacre of civilians. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.